This is World's Scariest Prisons, the Bastille. On July 14, 1789, a mob of angry French citizens surrounded the mighty stone walls of the Bastille. This fortress, built in the 14th century, was a political prison. To the revolutionary people seeking to overthrow the monarchy, the Bastille had become a symbol of the monarchy's unjust rule. The revolutionaries believed that the French monarchs were dictators who could imprison people whenever they wanted, and the Bastille was proof. The mob broke into the building looking for gunpowder stored there. They were also looking for the prison governor. The mob found, killed, and beheaded him, and also set free 7 prisoners. Behind the bars, also known as Bastille Saint-Antoine, located in Paris, France, operational 1417 until the French Revolution in 1789. Number of prisoners, more than 5,000 inmates, had been held in the Bastille by the time it was destroyed. Notable inmates: Charles Gounod, Duke of Brabant, Voltaire, author; Marquis de Sade, philosopher and writer; Marguerite de Lagny, author. The story. This event is considered to mark the start of the French Revolution. Soon after the end of the war, the story of the Bastille began to shift. Writers portrayed the storming of the Bastille, as it came to be called, as a story of liberation, while in truth it all started as a search for ammunition. Famed authors like Victor Hugo and Alexandre Dumas wrote popular stories about prisoners held for decades in the dungeons of the Bastille, men who did not see the light of day for years. These stories were very popular among the French people. The truth. The reality of life in the Bastille was different than the stories. Compared to other 18th century French prisons, scholars suggest conditions were bearable. In fact, dungeons in the Bastille were barely in use at the time of the siege. Many of the prisoners in the Bastille were political figures who could pay for food, medical care, and warm baths. The writer Marquis de Sade brought rugs and wine with him. The philosopher Voltaire had so many visitors that authorities were forced to limit his guests to 5 or 6 per day. Even after his sentence ended, Voltaire stayed at the Bastille to finish up some business. Destruction. Ultimately, the massive fortress was destroyed during the French Revolution, and only a few stones remained to mark its spot on the Place de Bastille. But the storming of the Bastille is still observed annually as a national holiday in France on July 14th. Ubelet at the Bastille. The Ubelet has been compared to the choky, a device described in Roald Dahl's Matilda. These torture chambers were rumored to exist at the Bastille and were definitely in use at other prisons. The prisoner was thrown or lowered on a rope into a narrow tube-shaped underground dungeon. Its only opening was at the top, through which guards tossed food to the prisoners. Sometimes the Ubelet would fill with water. Some were too narrow for prisoners to comfortably sit or lie down. The word Ubelet comes from the French verb oublier, which means to forget. Elmina Castle. When Africans were forcibly thrown from their homeland to become new slaves in what was known as the New World, they were often first held as prisoners at Elmina Castle. It was the last they would ever see of their continent. Elmina was the first permanent structure built by Europeans in Africa, south of the Sahara Desert. It was the first permanent slave outpost. Constructed in Ghana in 1492, it still towers over the sand and water at the far western African coast. Behind the bars, also known as Saho Horge de Mina Castle, located in Elmina, Ghana. Operational 1482 until 1872, when the British took over the fort after the Dutch abolished the slave trade. Number of prisoners: more than 30,000 prisoners passed through Elmina per year at its peak. Notable inmates: the king of an African city was imprisoned at Elmina during 1896 to 1897 after the British took control. Imprisonment. Elmina was originally a gold trading post, but by the 1600s, the Dutch were using it to imprison Africans. The massive buildings upstairs housed European slave traders who slept on beds in comfortably furnished suites. Downstairs, recently captured Africans were crowded into horrific dungeons to await their fate as slaves. Sometimes up to 200 people occupied one cell, leaving no room to lie down. All had to sit or stand. Slaves at Elmina. Slave traders captured people across the continent and traded them for objects like shells, guns, knives, bars of iron, silk, or mirrors. Then they were forced to march to the coast. Many died along the way. Those who survived were held in Elmina's cells until a ship arrived to transport them across the Atlantic. Elmina's location on the very edge of the coast was no accident. The castle gave sea captains a safe place to load their ships in the harbor, since pirate attacks were a constant threat. This always just makes me so sad. Like, that this was able to happen. Upon leaving Elmina Castle, slaves walked through the Door of No Return, a small opening in the castle walls. Rowboats took chained slaves to the big ships. By the 1700s, more than 30,000 people were sent through that door each year. Today, Elmina still stands. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a museum, a monument, and a concrete reminder of a terrible period in world history. The Middle Passage. Africans leaving Elmina Castle on slave ships left one prison only to find themselves once more in another. Conditions on the ships were even more horrific than those at the slave post. Passengers were packed together with little room to move and endured unthinkably brutal living conditions. The ship captains considered their human passengers to be cargo and wanted the African prisoners to arrive alive so they could be sold. Even so, many died at sea. The ocean crossing would last from 2 to 4 months, and in this time an estimated 20% of the people on board died from sickness and the inhumane conditions.